The most impressive performances this year, though, have been the returner Jamal Shed.
Mhm.
And Jamal Shed's the point guard. He's not a score first point guard by any stretch. But if he gets paid to play basketball after U of H, it's going to be because of his defense. And you mentioned the Kent State game, and it was a low scoring game, but like Houston played Texas Southern, and Texas Southern will probably also win the SWAC and be a tournament team.
Yep.
And they have a guy named PJ Henry who's averaging like 24 a game. Jamal Shed held him to 9. Right? They played what was the Oral Roberts game, the Max Amos. I probably
Yeah.
mispronounced that on my own podcast, but he was averaging 22 a game last season. Jamal Shed held him to 3. Like he's a guard eliminator that's going to make you find your second guy. Like you're going to figure out someone else to score the basketball because mano a mano, he's going to take that guy away. And we're talking about the St. Mary's matchup. St. Mary's has several guys that can score, so they have options, but he's going to make you go to your second.
Hey, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I'm Zach Farmer, and we have a lot to go over, a lot to discuss. We had a great week of basketball, some exciting notes to talk about, some not so exciting notes to talk about. We'll be talking about the loss for St. Mary's during the Wooden Legacy, as well as looking forward to the Houston matchup. We'll be bringing in Parker Ainsworth from the Locked On Cougs podcast to discuss the matchup with Houston this coming Saturday and to go over all of that. USF had a heartbreaker losing to Davidson over the weekend that would have kept them undefeated. But obviously, still a long way to go. Would have been a nice to have. They do have Utah State this coming weekend. Also talk about Pepperdine. Pepperdine had a kind of to be expected loss against the likes of UCLA, but again, obviously a little worse than even I think what we could have expected. Mick Cronin had his guys ready to go. Gonzaga didn't have the best weekend either, dropping its first game against second game in the PK 85 to Purdue. But Purdue looks really legit. We're not going to read too much in that, but I think we're going to start. Let me rattle off every team with who I think is the team of the weekend. And this is going to sounds odd to say because they went 1-2 over the weekend, but the team of the weekend and who we're going to focus on is Portland. The Portland Pilots, if you did not catch what happened over the weekend, they were part of the Phil Knight Invitational in Portland, and they opened up with number 1 North Carolina and had a lead with 4:39 left. We're down by only 3 with 50 seconds to go. Ended up losing this game by 8. And they hung with one of the best teams in the country, one of the most talented teams in the country from the opening tip. And this was impressive enough as it was. This was a coming out party to an extent for Shante Leggins and his crew. They looked the part. They looked like they belonged on the floor with North Carolina. It was really exciting to watch this. I was kind of like half paying attention to this game as I was driving up to see family for Thanksgiving, and it was hard to keep your eyes off of this game. This was an exciting game to watch, and they opened up a lot of eyes. And going into game 2, I was a little concerned that did they kind of blow everything in the first game? Did Portland maybe use up all their energy in this first matchup? And then they came out against Villanova and took control right away, and they ended up winning by 12. They led by double digits at the half. Villanova did make a run there in the second and got it close, but Portland was able to fend them off. You had Tyler Robertson had 15.7 rebounds, 8 assists in that one. Moses Wood at 16 and 6. Moses Wood at 21 in the North Carolina game. And then knowing that they're going to be in this 5th place game, they were awaiting the winner of Oregon and Michigan State and got Michigan State. Number 12, Michigan State. Last time we talked about them was when they were about ready to play Gonzaga. They weren't ranked at that point. But but they had gotten a win over Kentucky. So like they had made some moves since the last time we talked about the Spartans. And again, Portland came out on fire. Portland came out on a mission. Portland came out like they belonged on the court, and they absolutely belonged on the court with Michigan State. They led by 8 at the half. They were up by double digits at one point in the second. You're starting to see just how deep and how dangerous Portland can be. I think for those of us who've been paying attention know the danger of Portland and how good they can be, especially if they catch fire from three, like they did all weekend. And yes, Michigan State came back, they clawed back and Michigan State led by 10 with about a minute and a half left. And like everybody else, I thought like at that point, well, the game's a wrap. I'm just gonna turn it off or look away. And you looked back, and with 50 seconds left, with less than a minute to go, it's a 1-point game. Somehow Portland has clawed back into this. You got clutch shots from Christian Ciolin. You got clutch shots from Tyler Robertson. You got really good performances all across this roster over the weekend. Again, talk about the main guys: Robertson, Ciolin, Moses Wood, but Alden Applewhite, Chika Nduka. You can talk about Joey St. Pierre. So many of these guys really stepped up. Jack Perry stepped up this weekend and gave Portland kind of the nudge that they needed to be able to compete with these teams. They were facing some of the best teams in the country over the weekend. They looked the part. They looked like they belonged on the same floor with everybody else. And this speaks so much to what was talked about in the preseason, what we talked about leading into the start of this campaign, is that Portland is going to be in the mix. Portland is going to be part of that conversation. And one of the things that was a point of emphasis was, can they be consistent? Can they do this when everyone actually has the spotlight on them and no one is overlooking them? And as we saw this weekend, even though they came up just short against Michigan State and came up just short against North Carolina, you can't overlook Portland anymore. You have to pay attention to what they're doing. You have to look at just the progress this program has made in just the short year and a half. But this also, I think, emphasizes the idea that Portland has to start picking up some of these marquee wins. They got one for Villanova, and right now they're sitting just below the 100 line in KenPom. I think they're like 106, 104, somewhere around there. And could they actually produce an at-large resume? Could they put this together and look like a team that's going to compete for an at-large bid? And I think that there's potentially a scenario there. I'm not going to necessarily say that it's likely or anything like that, because I do still want to kind of play this by ear and be a little conservative on that front, but they have opportunities. And the most glaring one here is going to be when they face Oregon on December 17th. Again, Oregon is not going to be like Oregon's not a huge game, but it's going to look good on the resume. It's going to look good in the metrics. I think just over the last couple of weeks, we've kind of seen like Oregon has kind of a ceiling. At least it always seems like that they start out very slow under Dana Altman until they start to pick it up in Pac-12 play and then take off. But until then, they see Oregon, Portland has a number of games that they have to check off the box. They're no longer in the scenario where they can't lose games that they shouldn't lose. So again, between now and then, you have Multnomah, North Dakota State, New Orleans. Those all should be wins. Then even after that, you have Riverside before WCC play begins. These should be wins. The 4 losses that Portland has right now, they are 5-4. Okay, you have Carolina and Michigan State. No problem. No shame in losing tight, close games to those teams. But you also have a loss to Kent State. And yes, they are also a very good team so far this season. They went toe-to-toe with Houston just the other night, and we'll talk a little bit more about their matchup in a bit. But also they lost to Seattle. And while Seattle is not a bad team, it is not a team that if you think you're going to be an NCAA tournament team, you can be losing to. So this is something that we're going to just have to keep an eye on, and Portland's going to have to pick up the wins that they can, where they can. And once we get into conference play, the same thing is going to go here. The pressure is going to be on to not pick up losses to the bottom half of the league, even though right now the WCC has 5 top 100 teams in KenPom. So you still have Gonzaga, St. Mary's, BYU, USF, and Santa Clara all in the top 100. Portland now starting to scrape that top 100 mark. Even LMU is just right below that at 120, but with the number of teams that are going to be, I think, highly competitive in the WCC, there's going to be some attrition. There's going to be some teams that are knocked back. The LMUs, the Pepperdine, San Diego. You can't lose a game to Pacific. That's an absolute must. You cannot lose that game. They only get one opportunity against BYU, so that will be critical for Portland as well. Unlike last year, they're going to get 2 shots at Gonzaga and St. Mary's. And then the other school that they're only going to have 1 shot at is going to be Santa Clara, which kind of like last year, they only got 1 shot at Santa Clara. But this Portland team has been one we've been kind of waiting for their opportunity to break through, waiting for that chance that the Pilots could show everybody how good they potentially could be. And this weekend was absolutely it. It's just the amount of excitement I saw on Twitter over the weekend for Portland. And I think this is the thing. It's like WCC fans, there is, I think, a camaraderie here because we are the little conference, because we are a small conference. And when a program that was so down in the dumps like Portland was for a long time, to see them break through, to see them start to show promise, start to show this potential is exciting for all of us. And it's great for the league. It's great for everyone. It's like it makes it fun to have Portland good again. And we haven't really seen that from this squad in almost a decade. Now I'm going to put this out there just because I know Drew Timme is the default for this award because he is one of the best players in the country, and I get it. I understand. But I'm going to start with I'm going to start just a dark horse campaign for this. Tyler Robertson should be in the conversation, if not the leader for player of the year. I mean, this guy just fills up a stat box, whether it be on the point front, rebounds, assists. I was just looking at it, and he's averaging 16, 5, and 6 for the season. Tyler Robertson should be in that conversation for player of the year. And again, he might be what would be considered an MVP. Obviously, the WCC doesn't have an MVP, but this is a guy who should be in that conversation. We should be talking about Tyler Robertson more. And I think we're going to be doing a lot more of that as the season rolls along. All right, we're going to transition, talk a little bit about the other team who was at the PK 85, and that was Gonzaga. And I think what we're starting to see, again, Gonzaga went 2-1 over the weekend. They did pick up a loss against Purdue, a very good Purdue team, mind you. They ended up winning the PK Legacy. So this is a team who came to Portland, did what they were supposed to do. In fact, probably did more than they were supposed to do, and impressed a lot of people. So Purdue is going to be there toward the end of the season. So I don't think you can read too much, but there are some things that we can talk about with Gonzaga. And I think a large component of it is actually focusing on the defense. This is a Gonzaga team that doesn't seem to be always cohesive on defense, doesn't always seem to have that fire on the defensive end. And last year, you could obviously point to Chet Holmgren being the one guy who was going to do that because he was the WCC Defensive Player of the Year. an absolute monster on the defensive end, whether it be rebounding, block shots. Like he changed your game plan and changed the game plan for any team that was going up against the Zags last year. And that rim protector isn't there. We have not seen really the maturation completely of Nolan Hickman or Hunter Salas to this point yet. Obviously, there's still a long way to go. There's still plenty to do. Gonzaga has played the second toughest schedule in all of college basketball, so there's obviously something to that. But when you do have losses of 18 and 16, like Gonzaga does so far, you have to put a pause. You have to start to think, maybe there's something else wrong. Maybe there's what else can be improved on this team. And the defense is definitely one of those key components. Looked at the two losses and then the game against Xavier on Sunday, which also was a very tight contest for Gonzaga. They let Texas shoot 51% from the field. They let Purdue shoot 47% from the field, and then they let Xavier shoot 51% from the field. And this is going to be a consistent thing for Gonzaga to focus on, I think, throughout the course of the rest of the non-conference and then in the conference play. It's not a wrap that Gonzaga is going to be an Elite Eight Final Four team. Not that it ever really is. You always just once you get in, matchups depend everything on the tournament. But the idea that there are some people questioning whether Gonzaga is a tournament team or whether Gonzaga is still in the national title conversation, I don't think we can have that conversation yet. I don't think there's any one team, because I think what this weekend showed more than anything is that the championship window, the teams that are going to be in the hunt, is wide open. No one has really stepped out and proven that they're the undisputed best team in the country. And even Houston, who is likely going to end up being the number one in the poll, hasn't actually gotten the marquee win that would signify, yes, they're the team. And the next 3 weeks, that will be their challenge with St. Mary's, Alabama, and then also Virginia over the next few weeks. So you can't exclude Gonzaga. You can't take them out the equation just yet. Do they have things to work on? Clearly. Are there things that could be problematic in the tournament? Sure. But the tournament's a long ways away. And there's no reason to start to wave the warning bell, the white flag, or anything like that. I was about to maybe do that if they had lost to Xavier, but they responded very well. They cracked down and they were able to get it done. For Gonzaga, the one thing I will say that I thought has been very impressive, and he kind of had his coming out party over the weekend, was the performance of Ben Gregg. Like just in the 12 minutes he had against Xavier, he brought so much energy. He was getting the loose balls. He was in the right place. He changed the tone of the game when he was in there. And I think that's going to be a key component as we're starting to see him get more playing time, him get more confidence, and he's really starting to kind of be that backup five as of right now. We're starting to see that a little bit more where he's coming in for Timmy or playing alongside Timmy. And I think he's going to be a big contributor as we head closer to conference play. All right, we've gone through some positive stuff, some less positive stuff, and now I'm going to get into the part where I don't want to overreact. Well, I do want to overreact, but I'm going to try my best not to overreact to St. Mary's loss to Washington in the Wooden Legacy Championship game. St. Mary's has no business losing to a team like Washington. This was a tournament that, on the surface, even when it was announced last year, you saw the opponents and who was going to be a part of it. This should have been a lock for St. Mary's, and it wasn't. The Gales shot horribly from three in both games. Yes, they did win the Vandy game, but they shot 3 for 11 from three in that one, and then went 6 for 29 against Washington. And the game against Washington was ugly all the way around. Washington imposed a zone defense, which obviously you don't see very often, and St. Mary's took a long, long time to figure out how to break it. It took them roughly about 35 minutes to figure out how to do it consistently. And yes, they were able to force overtime. I thought they did a very good job of closing that part out. But then here and there, some little mistakes really cost them down the stretch. But the other thing so I think that that's one thing. But for me, something I want to see more of, what I would like to see is like I would like to see this team get more out of Alex Dukas and Logan Johnson on the offensive end. And really what it is, it's not necessarily the production, because we know Alex Dukas every so often goes off for 20. Same for Logan Johnson. I I think what I'm looking for is for those guys to be more assertive in clutch scenarios. These two are these two, along with Bowen, are probably undoubtedly the senior leaders on this team. They've been there the longest. They know the system. They know how everything works, and they know how to win in clutch time. And those two being, I think, the most dynamic offensive threats that St. Mary's has, most consistent offensive threats that St. Mary's has, need to be more assertive. I know like Aiden Mahaney has kind of taken up some of that role in the last few games, and he's been great. Like for a first year player, for a freshman, I think he's done a very good job of stepping up into that role. But this is still a spot I think that Dukas and Johnson should be playing a bigger role on that front. During the last possession of that contest, or I should say of regulation, it was Mahaney who takes an open three. Again, no problem with Mahaney taking that shot. But then on the reload, it's Logan Johnson taking a three from about 28 feet. And that's not his strength. And I think that's one of the things is like we need Logan Johnson as a type player who's best at attacking the basket. And it would be great to see him in more action that's actually taking advantage of that ability. And then flip side of that is actually Dukas getting in position more to kind of be a dynamic scorer, because he is your best 3-point shooter. He should be getting more active looks at that. And it doesn't seem like that he's always as assertive as he maybe could be, or at least in my mind should be on that front. And these little things are going to make a difference with who is likely going to be the number one team in the country come Saturday in Houston. So St. Mary's does have a game in between. They do play New Mexico on Wednesday, but the big circle is going to be Houston on Saturday in Fort Worth. And this is one of the more athletic teams in the country. This is a team that plays very similarly to the way St. Mary's does. This is a team that is one of the best defensive teams in the country. They're one of the more physical teams in the country, and they are one of the most athletic teams in the country. And they also play a similar pace to that of the Gales. They both play slow, but Houston is a team that wants to still get out and run. And this is something that St. Mary's is going to have to slow down. They're going to have to be able to control the pace like they do against Gonzaga. And again, this is something we know that St. Mary's does very well. They control the pace of play. And it's going to be important that we see a little bit more from a Logan Johnson and an Alex Dukas. This is the sort of game that maybe Mitchell Saxon is going to play a bigger factor. Before we go dive into too much of that, we'll bring in Parker Ainsworth from the Locked On Cougs podcast, and he'll be able to kind of go over a little bit more of what we should expect to see on Saturday. All right, and as we're going to start talking about this St. Mary's Houston matchup, I'm going to bring in Parker Ainsworth. He is the host of the Locked On Cougs podcast. You can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. You can find him on Twitter at PAinsworth512. Parker, how's it going?
It's going well, man. It's wrapping up holiday break and looking forward to more basketball. How about yourself?
Same here. gonna be hitting the gym a little bit more after the weekend, after all the meals, but it's good. I mean, basketball. We're full into almost a full month into the season now, and we have one of the bigger non-conference matchups, single matchups, Houston and St. Mary's coming up this coming weekend, and so I wanted to bring you on and just talk about like Houston, like the general expectations coming into the season, because we know Houston was one of the favorites coming in. It's one of the top 5 teams that are on the list to win a championship. Going into the season, kind of what was the vibe around the program, the fan base, and then also kind of where are we today now, almost about a month in?
Well, I mean, the expectation has been high the whole time. So honestly, things start to shift when last offseason, Marcus Sasser, who injured himself last year, but was going to, test the waters in the pros anyways, got a late first round grade, early second round kind of draft grade and decided to come back. And that really like kind of set the stage for like, oh, we're going to have a pro on the roster. And then you also have Jarris Walker as, playing like the one and done kind of guy he may end up being. People are putting him in the top 10, depending on what list you're reading as far as draft picks this spring. So you got 2 pros on the roster. And, Terrence Arsenault is coming off the bench, but he may be one of those guys too. Like all of a sudden it's like, oh, this is a really good basketball team. And truthfully, it's interesting that like you've got that kind of talent with what Kelvin Sampson does defensively, because he is a like grinded out, hard-nosed basketball kind of guy. And so balancing those things has been fascinating to watch, because you don't see 5 stars like Jarris Walker show up to come play for a coach like that very often. You don't see guys like Marcus Sasser turn down pro money potentially to come back and play in a system like that. And so it's really been kind of like molding of all the different worlds. It's been an exciting year so far.
And obviously the big one is the return of Marcus Sasser, as you mentioned. It's like, what describe kind of the impact that his return has been versus what the expectations were early on, and then what we have seen thus far.
Well, so last year, between the year that last year and the year before, he had a really big increase in shooting, and I guess shooting percentages, I should say. Last year he shot like 44% from 3 before he got hurt, and he's not quite at 44% right now, but he is shooting the ball very, very well. And frankly, I think until the Kent State game, I would say, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more specifically in a second, but the deal there has been that like they have an outlet, like when it's late in the shot clock, need a basket, they know they can get the ball to Sasser and like, hey, take your guy 1-on-1. We need something to happen, right? And that's the difference in this and like other Kelvin Sampson teams, where it's been flow of the offense, find the big man on the roll kind of stuff. We don't have to worry about that quite as often. He's a true 3-level scorer though. He shoots the ball from outside. He gets downhill and gets the elbow in the nail area very well. And then he's had some like Sports Center top 10 kind of finishes around the rim. I mean, he's a 3-level scorer for sure.
And let's kind of talk about that Kent State game a little bit. Houston 6-0 to this point, and for the first few games, this is a team that rolled really easily through, like the Oral Roberts and some of the other early ones. Had Oregon on the road, and that was a tough matchup, and at least for the first half before they got rolling in the second. But this Kent State game really was a dogfight to the end. It was 49-44 final at home. Just kind of talk about like because this was such a different game than we have seen thus far for Houston. What did you see, and what can we take away from that game?
Well, I think first of all, this team is human, right? Like, I guess in college basketball, there has been a team going undefeated. It's very rare that you have teams going undefeated, right? Theoretically, they're going to lose a game at some point. And for a lot of Saturday, I feel like it might happen Saturday. Truthfully, I think Sampson said it well after the game. He was like, it's good to figure out that you can win a game when you shoot that poorly. As a team, they shot 42% from 2 and just 11% from 3. And frankly, that's just kind of not been the way that the ball has gone in the basket the previous 5 games. I do think that as far as like big picture of the season goes, it showed that like if Houston cannot score the basketball, they're going to have to find other advantages. And a big one on Saturday was rebounding. I think they won the rebounding battle by like 23 rebounds, which meant that they're missing a lot of shots, but they're getting a lot more shots, right? And so that was obviously a big push for them. If we're going to keep talking about Sasser, I thought he shot 1 for 10 from 3 himself, but he found ways to get like to the free throw line. He went 8 from 8 from the line. Like he found other ways to impact scoring as the game went on, and that was really, really important. But it's never good to be down 10 points early in your own building on a Saturday.
No, especially when you give like those And smaller programs, teams are on the come up. You give them a little bit of hope, and it keeps them in the game longer and longer, especially when they're on the road. No,
You're a smaller schools guy though. I don't have to tell you, Kent State will be a tournament team. Like that's a
yeah,
good basketball team.
yeah. I mean,
It's
they played Portland a couple weeks ago, and they beat Portland. And again, this is a Portland team in the WCC who is already knocked off. They knocked off Villanova the weekend. As we're recording, this is prior to the Michigan State game on Sunday, so there's still a potential that Portland's going to get another big win. But no, Kent State's been they're a good team. This isn't a team that's going to should not sneak up on anybody this year. They also do play Gonzaga, I believe, in about a week and a half. So there's another WCC matchup Kent State will see down the road. Now, the one thing that we know that Houston has hung its hat on, that Kelvin Sampson has hung his hat on, has been the defense. This Houston team has been one of the better defensive teams in the country over the last 5-6 years, last decade, and as we've seen already this year, this is a team that just eliminates the opponent's best scorer. And was just the other day, Sincere Carey from Kent State, who averages 17.9, had 9 points. Just kind of talk about like the defense that we'll see on Saturday from this Houston team, because this is, again, like this one of the best programs. And when I watched just even a little bit in the Oregon game, I was kind of blown away just at the athleticism and how much action this team has.
Yeah, there's a ton of length and athleticism in like Tremont Mark, who's listed at like 6'5", but with his wingspan plays more like a 6'7". The 5-star recruit Jarris Walker I mentioned, he's a freshman. He's a 6'8" with a positive wingspan. I don't guess know what it is, but he's defending the rim more like a 7-footer a lot of the time. He's coming on the backside, like the classic 2-step gallop to span both sides of the rim kind of stuff. Really, really impactful defender that also plays defense on the perimeter like a 2-3-4 kind of guy. The most impressive performances this year, though, have been the returner Jamal Shed. And Jamal Shed's the point guard. He's not a score-first point guard by any stretch. But if he gets paid to play basketball after U of H, it's going to be because of his defense. And you mentioned the Kent State game, and it was a low-scoring game. But like Houston played Texas Southern, and Texas Southern will probably also win the SWAC and be a tournament team. And they have a guy named PJ Henry who's averaging like 24 a game. Jamal Shed held him to 9. Right? They played what was the Oral Roberts game, the Max Amos, I probably mispronounced that on my own podcast, but he was averaging 22 a game last season. Jamal Shed held him to 3. Like he's a guard eliminator that's going to make you find your second guy. Like you're going to figure out someone else to score the basketball, because mano a mano, he's going to take that guy away. And we're talking about the St. Mary's matchup. St. Mary's has several guys that can score, so they have options, but he's going to make you go to your second one.
I think that's where we kind of get into this matchup. And then we now kind of moving into the St. Mary's team. St. Mary's is one of the top defensive teams in the country. Houston is one of the top defensive teams in the country. I've already kind of seen some of the jokes on Twitter, to the point of like, it's going to be the first to 45 wins, because neither of these teams are going to score a lot of points in this matchup. And because they're so good defensively, they're so disciplined that we're probably going to be looking at a matchup where you're looking for like the second or third guy to kind of step up and be that primary scorer. Whereas St. Mary's, like, even in the last couple of years, is a team that is probably more balanced than most teams even most teams around the country, where in the last couple of years, I would not have been able to point of like, here's our primary scorer. Like 1 through 5 in the roster among the starters, I think could be that guy on any given day. And the one thing I think is going to be the biggest difference here, at least the way I read the matchup, is Houston's athleticism, because they read so similar in style, because they are two of the slowest paced teams in the country. They are two of the best defensive teams in the country. What's kind of like, in your initial read of St. Mary's in this matchup, what was something that stood out to you, or what was something that you think that Houston's going to have to key in on going into this one?
It's the big fella, Saxon. So Houston beat Oregon by 10, and they end up kind of pulling that away from that game at the end. But that game was competitive for about the first 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And frankly, the big thing there was N'Faly Dante, their big fella, right, was just bigger than anyone Houston had. And it was like he had a bunch of putback rebounds, and we would double the post, try and get the ball out of his hand. That meant someone was open. And it wasn't necessarily his assist or his basket, but his impact was really, really big. And Saxon can score. And so
Yeah.
we've kind of got, figure that out, because while Walker is 6'8" and long and, built like an ox, and Jawan Roberts is, a 6'9", classic tough guy that Sampson always seems to have, they don't play a lot of guys over 6'9". And so they're realistic, like, we're just shorter, and finding some way to match up with Saxon. If I'm, predicting things, Sampson typically doubles the post and tries to force the ball out. But as you mentioned, St. Mary's has guys that can score if we force the ball out. So how Houston adapts to Saxon playing is going to be big to me.
Yeah, it's one of the there was a lot of, I think, initial concern or just like question marks because you lose Matthias Toss from a year ago and he was an all-league player. How quickly could Mitchell Saxon kind of replace him? And like, I was actually probably one of the ones who was really high on Saxon going into the year. I'm like, there will be no problem whatsoever, because I harken back to the last matchup against Gonzaga a year ago where the Gales knocked them off. He was guarding Chet Holmgren out on the perimeter. He was going in and out with a top three NBA pick, and he was keeping with them. And because Toss was in foul trouble and it was a necessity, you saw the defensive skills were there. And I think that's the one, like, we knew the defense was there. It was whether the offense could follow suit. And so far, so good. It's like the offense has followed suit with Saxon. And yeah, you talk about the size, but I do feel like college basketball is starting to mirror a little bit more and more of that NBA style as far as like the positionless players. And that, I think that's more, it's, to me, that's what it looks like. A lot of what Houston has is like, you have a lot of guys who can play 1 through 4, 2 through 5. And just kind of talk about like the versatility that this Houston team has, because I feel like that's one of the tougher matchups for anyone going up against this team.
Well, and I think the interesting there is, like, when I talked to an Oregon guy previewing that game a couple weeks ago, I can't tell you who the point guard is, right? It's either Sasser or Shed. I can't really tell you who, like, the power forward is. Sometimes it's Jarris Walker, sometimes it's Jawan Roberts, sometimes they put in Reggie Chaney. Like, they have a bunch of guys that kind of rotate through spots. And one thing I think Sampson does really well is he like runs different sets based on the guys in the game, not necessarily like the 5-man's always going to get the ball to the left block or anything, quite that traditional. It's always a little bit different than that. And it allows guys to be a little bit more free flowing. And then, like, I can tell you, like, that Marcus Sasser likes to get to that elbow to nail, like somewhere in the free throw line area, but he's going to get there from a bunch of different places, right? I can tell you that Terrence Arsenault likes the shooting from the slots and the corners, but how they get him to those spots is different depending on who's on the floor. And so it really is a flowing offense in that sense, because they've got Sasser and Shedd are both about 6'2", and then they've got Arsenault and Mark are both about 6'5", and then Walker and Roberts both about 6'8". Like, they don't have a bunch of, a true traditional looking basketball team when they walk in the gym.
And this game is going to be at a neutral site. This is going to be up in Fort Worth. So this will be a bit more of a traditional neutral, even though it's still going to be in Texas, and it's going to be a longer trek for the St. Mary's people to get down there. For someone who's down in Texas, who may have been able to visit like Fort Worth a little bit more often, for some of the St. Mary's travelers, some of the California travelers who are going to be making that trip, what are some things that are to do in Fort Worth that you know of, or like, are there some restaurants, or like what should the Californians experience in Fort Worth?
Well, so I know, first of all, like, a nightlife thing would be Billy Bob's. It'll be like, what if you think of Texas, it'll be like a Texas-y. They'll have someone playing guitar in a cowboy hat, and they'll be dancing and beer drinking and that kind of stuff. And that's downtown. They also have, like, if you're looking for like something during the day that feels very Texas-y, they have like a stockyards where you can go see like cattle and rodeo type stuff. Fort Worth feels a lot more like that stereotypical Texas than, frankly, Houston does. It's like 5 hours away. The other thing I'll say too is that if you're a beer drinking, there's like Martin House Brewing. I think the big thing everyone wants to do is find barbecue. I put some feelers out for like what the place to go to, and my people up that direction are saying it's called Panther City Barbecue. And that's what people I trust in the area are pointing to. Yeah. I haven't spent a whole lot of time in Fort Worth, but that's what they're saying. If you're going somewhere in the city, that's where they say to go.
those are two of my favorite things. You said barbecue and beer, like that. That's a great combination. And because like especially feel like here in the Bay Area, like we do have a great craft beer scene. We know Texas also has a great craft beer scene and all of that. And I think like I feel like when I saw this game on the calendar, it was obviously like I think the biggest non-conference game St. Mary's has had in a very long time, maybe if ever, based on what the preseason predictions for Houston was. Like how excited, like what was the excitement level, or what was kind of like the opinion when you saw St. Mary's pop on that schedule, and and then generally what should we expect the vibe to be on Saturday, do you think?
Well, Houston's one, and this is a WCC guy. When you're a top contending team in these smaller conferences, your non-conference schedule gets very heavily weighted. Like if Houston had dropped that Oregon game, that would hurt them a lot more than would have hurt Oregon, right? And so getting to play a team like St. Mary's that has, it's probably around the same size school, and as far as the basketball program and endowment, that kind of stuff, but it's a very strong program that like everyone assumes will be playing in March. And so winning that game for Houston, it carries the weight of winning, just like the Oregon game, or winning, they play Alabama the week after, or the big one on the calendar right now, the big one after is UVA a couple weeks later, right? Like winning those games is so huge for a school like Houston because people will probably poo-poo Houston beating SMU later, right? Like that's not going to be a big deal to people. But getting the opportunity to play a good basketball program like St. Mary's is it A, gets a chance to show off, and B, it's going to be on national TV. People are going to be watching. Regular season college football just ended. The Cougs kind of went out on a dud last night. so we're looking to turn things up on the basketball side of things, and
turn
it's
the
gonna be an
page
exciting weekend.
Yeah, turn the page, and it's now fully basketball season with the regular season complete. Great. Thanks, Parker, for coming on. Again, you can catch Parker on the Locked On Cougs podcast. You can also catch him on Twitter at P Ainsworth 512. Parker, again, thanks for coming on, and just looking forward to the game on Saturday.
Looking forward to it, man. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks. Want to thank Parker one more time for hopping on and talking some Houston basketball. It's going to be an exciting matchup. I'm looking forward to seeing it. And one of the things I know, like I've kind of chalked this up to being a loss for St. Mary's already. I think the athleticism of Houston is going to provide a lot of problems, and I don't know exactly how St. Mary's is going to be able to combat that. Also, just the pressure defense that Houston's going to be able to put on both Mahaney and Marshallonis. It's one of the things that at least I'm highlighting. But the more I've been talking with some others who are more familiar with Houston than I am, the more confident I've actually become that Houston could be vulnerable in this matchup, that Houston might actually go into an offensive funk. And this is something that is one of the pitfalls that Houston can have, is that if they shoot poorly, if they go into a funk, kind of like they did against Kent State, then they could actually fall victim to another team. They could fall victim to a loss. And even as Parker mentioned, that there's not really an expectation that this team is going to go undefeated. No, it's so rare that a team does. And of course, like they're going to lose along the way. It's a matter of when. St. Mary's will be their toughest test to this point of the schedule. Obviously, they'd also have Alabama and Virginia to follow. But this is going to be their biggest test to this point, and it's going to be St. Mary's' clearly biggest test to this point. And this is just the precursor to San Diego State. So this is a team I think that's going to be way more focused than they might have. Not to say that they weren't going to be focused going into this game, but I think with the loss to Washington, it's going to refocus the Gales on what they haven't done well in that matchup and what they still have to work on. And so I expect this team to be much better offensively, a lot more aggressive offensively. And if a zone is implemented in either of these next two games, I'd expect St. Mary's to be able to, that they figured out a way to break that a little faster than we saw this past week. And then one more note, I want to just kind of like say, like we talk about the tournaments and everything else. And this is one where I have been questioning this team basically from the off season to now. And I think what we saw over the weekend kind of continues to put that idea in my head that BYU is in trouble. BYU dropped its first two games at the Battle for Atlantis and then struggled to pick up a win against a badly hurt, badly injured Dayton team. It took everything that BYU had to pull out just the one win. They're 4-3 right now, and the 4 wins haven't been terribly impressive. It's not that they're getting blown out in any respect because they've been in almost every game they've played. They're doing a lot of the little things wrong, and it's costing them games. I say little things, like one of them is like the fact that like they've actually BYU is one of these teams they're known for their offense. But this BYU team has not been a good offensive team. Right now, they're sitting 8th in both field goal percentage and 3-point percentage in the WCC. And probably more alarming for BYU has been the fact that they are dead last in the conference in turnovers. And with the number of close games that they've been involved with, this is something that's going to bite them hard once they get into conference play. Again, I had a preseason picked 4th. The more I'm watching them, the more I'm looking at this team, and then even some of the others in the WCC, they are sliding and sliding and sliding further and further. And I don't know if they finished better than 6th or 7th now. They were 5th a year ago, and everybody else has gotten better. BYU looks like they are worse than a year ago. That was what I thought before the season. And so far, that has been what we've seen out of the Cougars. And I don't want to necessarily leave on like a sour note or something like that. So at least like one of the things I see that I'm going to talk about that's kind of a little bit more on the upside is the fact that LMU came off the Jamaica Classic, and we saw them win that one. And yes, it was like to Georgetown and also to Wake Forest. But then they followed it up with a pretty convincing win against Bellarmine, and Bellarmine is a solid team. They are an up and coming team. We saw them last year against both St. Mary's and Gonzaga, and they played them both actually really well. This LMU team is not, you can't overlook them. Like, again, like I said, like LMU could still be in this mix with everybody else. And as it stands right now, LMU is, I believe they're now 6-2 after that win. They were 5-2. So yeah, they are 6-2 now. They sit at 126 in KenPom, which right now would put them in 6th in the WCC, right behind Portland. And this is an LMU team. I think that's like, if they can stay healthy and continue to get healthy, they're going to be in the conversation. I penciled them in at 9, but with the caveat that if they got healthy, they're going to be in the mix with everybody else. And so far, that looks like that's what's going to come to fruition. We'll see how it goes. This week is going to be an interesting one for LMU. Like LMU schedule, I'm just going to take a look at it real quick. The Colorado State on Wednesday, a big matchup for them, and that will actually be the solo one that they have. So they're going to get a really good opportunity to play a good team on the road. And if they can pick that one up, LMU, I think, is going to be right there in the mix with everybody else. We have a lot of really good matchups. Gonzaga is playing Baylor. You have Santa Clara taking on Wyoming in Salt Lake City. St. Mary's has the 2 games, New Mexico, and then also going to be against Houston. San Diego is going to be at San Diego's hosting UNLV, and then another one, actually, all right, LMU. I did miss another LMU game. The other LMU game is going to be Nevada coming to LA for that matchup. LMU has two great opportunities to pick up good wins. St. Mary's has opportunities to pick up good wins. Santa Clara does. USF does, with Utah State coming in. And then Gonzaga also with the great opportunity against Baylor. Lot to clean up before they see Baylor. Could be the Caleb Lohner revenge game for he against Gonzaga, but we'll see how that all wraps up. All right, and with that, we will close it out. Thanks again for listening to the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. You can find it on your favorite streaming services, on YouTube. You can also find me on Twitter at Post by Zach, as well as TikTok at Post by Zach. And until then, I will catch you next time.